travelers, and welcome to Go See, Do Explore.
Here, we dive deep into the heart of travel, sharing hidden gems, unforgettable experiences, and the stories that make each destination unique.
Whether you're a seasoned traveler or dreaming of your next getaway, you're in the right place to get inspired.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashleigh.
And together, we'll set the course for your next great adventure and discover the stories that make each place unforgettable.
It's time to go, see, and do more. Let's explore. Hello, everybody. We are back with our third episode in our Italy recap series. And this time we are talking about Florence and Bologna.
Excited to go to the middle of Italy.
Originally, when we started planning this trip, I knew we wanted to go to Sicily and we wanted to go to Venice. And then pretty quickly, after doing our research, I discovered that Florence is probably a place we should check out too.
And I had wanted to go to Florence for a long time. That was on my list.
So we added Florence, and then Bologna kind of quickly followed after that.
Yeah.
Once again, we took the train from Naples to Florence. The neighborhood we stayed at in Florence is known as the Oltre Arno, which means south of the Arno, right?
Yeah, or the other side of the... I can't remember if it's south. It is south, but I think it might just mean the other side of the Arno.
We chose that area because it is kind of less crowded than the other side of the river.
Yeah, it's supposed to be cool, too. It's like where the cool people are, the locals. And,
the hip neighborhood.
Yeah, not all those tourists.
Right. We definitely found the crowds to be less on that side of the river for sure. We also had good restaurants, and I think overall we are happy that we stayed there.
Yeah, you're going to have to walk a little bit farther, and in Florence you have to walk pretty much everywhere, but it really wasn't that far. Like, even walking to the train station was like a 20-minute walk, which doesn't seem bad at all.
Yeah, the train station was on like the far other side of the city. But yeah, we kind of mentioned in the episode where we talked about the trains and kind of getting around Italy, Florence is really set up to walk. I think it was Travel and Leisure or Condé Nast Traveler, I don't remember which one of those, but recently just said that Florence is the most walkable city in Europe.
Yeah, they have buses and they have taxis and stuff like that, but just a lot of times it doesn't make sense to use them.
It'll be faster to just walk there than, especially the time that it takes to wait for a bus.
Yeah.
That was kind of nice about Florence. We did a lot of walking those few days we were in Florence because it was the best way to get from point A to point B.
That was hot.
That was the hottest part of this trip. I kind of set this up. We were going from south to north so that as it was getting warmer, as the summer progressed, we would be hopefully getting away from the heat. But it caught up with us in Florence. It was supposed to get up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit one day, I think for several days, but it never actually got that high. It was like mid-90s. So when we arrived in Florence, the first thing we did was the Uffizi Gallery. The Uffizi is one of the big tourist destinations in Florence. It's the big famous art museum, and Uffizi means office in Italian. So it is the building that used to be, back in the day, in like the 16th century, it was the office of the Medici family.
Right. It was attached to the Florence Republic offices, or like the government headquarters. They just built their headquarters right next to it so they could control things.
Yeah, the Medici had their hands all over the city of Florence, and it's a very interesting history to learn about.
Like they're long gone now, but it's funny because they're still kind of everywhere in Florence. Like their marks are everywhere.
We chose to do the Uffizi on Tuesday when we arrived because Tuesdays in the summer anyway, they have late hours. So since it's one of the most popular tourist attractions in Florence, it can be very busy and can be kind of hard to appreciate an art museum when there are tons and tons of other people around. So I thought that was kind of a good trick. I want to say the museum was open until like 10 p.m. on Tuesdays. So we chose a 5:30 entrance time, which I felt like it was kind of a good time because a lot of the crowds had already left for the day, and the longer that we stayed, the less busy, less crowded it got. It was almost overwhelming at the Uffizi because there was so much art and the building was beautiful and there's statues and paintings everywhere. It was overwhelming. We enjoy art galleries and museums and things like that. I got kind of burnt out before we got to the end of it.
Yeah, this was a common theme in some of the museums we went into. Yeah, we love art. I think we're fairly serious about art. We know some things about the visual arts, although we're not experts. There are so much art in some of these museums that, and you really don't have a good basis of being able to evaluate, like, okay, obviously all these pieces are at least somewhat significant because they're in this museum, some that are really significant, and you can read all the descriptions, but it's just too much to do. We came to really appreciate the couple times we had guided tours because they were able to help us sort of focus and understand what's really important in that museum.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea if you want a little bit of help filtering through a museum like the Uffizi to look for a guided tour. If you do decide to go on your own, it is required that you book your tickets in advance with a time slot. And like I mentioned earlier, I think that if you're available on a Tuesday in the afternoon, evening, it's a way to kind of get a little bit less crowds and kind of have a little bit more space in the museum.
Yeah, and just to say, I think the other approach to a museum is you can just kind of walk through it and let it wash over you and not take any one piece kind of too seriously. That's another way you can sort of get through those situations, but you're definitely missing some detail when you do that. So you just have to choose what's right for you.
Our first full day in Florence, we decided to get out of the city and do a wine tour of Tuscany. There are a lot of options when you look on Viator and get your guide, and they can get kind of expensive. We chose a half-day option that went to the Chianti Classico region, which we heard a lot about while we were there. Yes. But it was a really good tour, especially if you like those really full-bodied red wines. If you are a white wine, a light red wine drinker, this is probably going to be more than you can handle. I don't know if that sounds bad.
It's fine. It's not going to like keel over.
No, but you're probably not going to walk away wanting to buy anything.
Tuscany is known for full-bodied reds. That's really the main thing that they do. And as we discussed last week on the Sicily episode, a lot of these wines, the DOC or DOCG wines, they're made to certain specifications. So while there will be certainly differences between different properties and things of that nature, within a spectrum that is somewhat tightly defined, I'd say for something like Chianti Classico, it will vary, but not that much. Now, they also have the IGT wines, and again, we talked about that on the Sicily episode, so you can go reference that if you want to know more about IGT. But yeah, you're getting Tuscan wines and Chianti Classico. You're getting Chianti Classico, which is going to be 80% Sangiovese and 20% of something else made to very tight specifications.
Both of the wineries that we visited, though, we did taste a super Tuscan as well.
Right, which is the IGT. That's where the winemakers have a lot more freedom and flexibility. Basically, just everything has to be from there and it has to be made there. But within those parameters, it can be whatever.
The tour that we did, it said that it did not include lunch, but it did come with a snack. And the fact that they called what we got at the second winery a snack.
It was an Italian snack.
It was ridiculous. It was so much meat and cheese. There was bread, there was olive oil, there was balsamic vinegar, so much food.
Different kinds of bread.
And our tour guide told us that they treat their guest as a Italian grandmother would. So just kept bringing out the food, kept bringing out the bread. It was definitely enough for a lunch, that's for sure.
Yeah, I really liked the Chianti Classico there because they used, for their remaining 20%, they used Alicante, which is a Spanish grape, and it's a little bit lighter. And so that was a Chianti Classico more to my taste. But
yeah, that's the bottle that we brought home.
We
did end up picking up some olive oil from the first one, which was nice. Well, it was really interesting what they did because they had us taste the olive oil, almost like sip the olive oil, which is something
it was cool.
Don't do very often. And then they had us sip the wine and then sip the olive oil. And you saw the difference between both the olive oil and the wine when you drink them together. So it's kind of an interesting way to see how wine and food kind of interact.
But Tuscany was really scenic, as you might expect.
Yes.
We were there on kind of a cloudy day.
Yeah, it was a cloudy day.
But it was still nice to get out there.
It's definitely an area that I would like to see more of. I feel like the takeaway from this whole trip for me, like the cities were cool, but I feel like when I go back to Italy, I want to see more of the countryside, the little towns on the water kind of a thing.
Yeah, I would go back to Tuscany, although I would say this will come out as we discuss more, but I think there were other wine regions that I preferred, honestly. Although, I mean, we did one little section of Tuscany too, and maybe that's not fair to Tuscany.
Right.
But
I know there were some tours I looked at that went to Montalcino instead
Yeah.
of Chianti Classico.
which I think I would have preferred, but it was more expensive.
Yeah, I think we picked the cheapest tour that was available on the date that we were looking.
Yeah,
So.
Brunello di Montalcino is a really high-end Italian red.
So after drinking all of that wine, I was super tired and I fell asleep on the bus on the way back. So we didn't do too much that afternoon, evening. But the next day, it was kind of an art and history tour. We started the day at the Accademia Gallery, which is home to Michelangelo's David.
Yes, and not a whole lot else. It's a pretty small museum. It was built for the David. And then there's compared to like the Uffizi or the other ones, there's not nearly as much. There's still probably a half dozen fairly large rooms.
This was one of the things that was at the top of my list for Florence. Like, yes, I have to see the David. I need to go to the Accademia. But a week out of this trip, all of the timed entries were booked.
Yeah, it was a surprise to me. I figured they would fill up a few days in advance. I didn't think a week out it would be totally booked.
Yeah, the Uffizi had a lot more availability of time slots, but I guess it's a bigger museum too. So what we ended up doing is I found, I think on Get Your Guide, a guided tour of the Accademia and the David. You are still able to wait in line for tickets, but who knows how long you'll be waiting there. And with our kind of limited time in Florence, I thought that booking a guided tour with skip the line entrance was a good idea. And like you alluded to when we were talking about the Uffizi, it gave us a lot of context about the David, about Michelangelo. It was very interesting, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, it was good. It's that kind of information that makes an experience a lot more meaningful, especially if you don't know a lot. I think we knew a little about the David, but this was a lot more information, and about Michelangelo and the Renaissance and his life in Florence and Rome. Again, some of that I think we knew, but some of it we didn't know, and it was cool to hear it from a Florentine person who had strong opinions about these things.
Yeah, it was very interesting. There is a replica of the David that's in this plaza. It's a very famous plaza. We walked through it, I think, with our suitcases the first day. Mm-hmm. That is where the original David was for hundreds of years. And then they were getting worried about the weather basically damaging this priceless work of art. So they built the Accademia to house the David, and they decided they would put a replica in this plaza. But then to make it weatherproof, they made it out of bronze. And so they unveiled this beautiful bronze replica, and the people of Florence said, "We do not like this one." I think is the way our tour guide explained it. And so they moved the bronze one out to a park kind of on a very high vantage point in the city, and they had an artist do another marble replica of the David that now stands in that plaza. So it's kind of funny. There are 3 David statues in the city of Florence. The original is the one in the Accademia. And I have to tell you, I'd heard, obviously, people talk about the David, but seeing it in person, it's so big.
Yeah, it's huge.
Like, his foot is like the size of my arm. It's enormous.
Yeah, usually in photos, you can't tell that it's that large. It's really big.
Yeah. I mean, when we were there, I tried to take some pictures that you can kind of see, like, where, some people in it for some.
Mm-hmm. It's on a big pedestal, too.
Yeah, it's definitely a must-do when you're in Florence. I think if you don't see the David, did you really see Florence? Am I allowed to say that?
I mean, you can say whatever you want. After the Accademia, we went to the Duomo and various other sites in the Duomo complex. The Duomo is the big cathedral in Florence. There are a lot of churches in Florence, a lot of big and significant churches, but the Duomo is the big cathedral. It's famous for a few different things. One is the baptistry, which is kind of an outbuilding, and it's got really famous doors. I think the doors today are replicas. The originals are in the museum, the Duomo Museum, which we'll talk about in a second. That was really cool to go in. A lot of very famous Florentines were baptized there. It was a little under construction when we were there.
I feel like that is like the theme of this entire trip.
Yeah.
Especially the churches. Like you go into this famous church, like,
Yeah.
oh, there's some scaffolding.
So it was maybe a little disappointing. I'm still glad we went in there, but I mean, it was still really cool. Like the exterior of the building, I thought was the coolest part, actually. I was expecting like some big baptismal font though, and no, it's just like a little 8-sided baptismal font. I mean, it's a nice one. I think there are carvings on it and stuff, but it's small. It's not one of those giant ones. We did the tower. We didn't really want to do the tower.
The bell tower.
The bell tower. But like just the ticket we had to get to do the things we wanted to do included this. So we're like, I guess we'll do this.
I should mention that there is a ticket that will get you into, I believe, just the baptistry and the museum. But once again, booking it, a week or so in advance, or I think we may have even tried to book this the day before or the day of, and those were all booked up. One of the most famous things in the Duomo complex is the dome climb. The dome of the Duomo is the most famous. The Duomo. We started calling them Duomes.
Yeah.
Apparently there's a very good view. Like I've mentioned, we had kind of limited time.
It was really hot.
It was very hot. I wasn't really...
humid.
Yeah. So,
and crowded. Like not super, super crowded, but crowded enough that stairs are annoying.
Right. And so we didn't really want to climb anything, but but the tickets that I bought us included the bell tower. So we did do some of the bell tower.
We did like 2/3 of it. We didn't go to the final platform because we got up there and we're like, this is enough. And the time was kind of running long, and so we just went back down, got a bunch of water.
Yes.
We went to the Duomo Museum, which has a ton of art and statuary and things I think that have been involved in the life of that church over time but are not in the building today. The doors of the baptistry, they had a kind of a famous contest to make them. So they have like other ones that were never doors on that baptistry, but there was like other like significant entrance, including I think a Brunelleschi one. I'm pretty sure that's right. There's a lot of art in there. We went into the Duomo itself, which that is free. You can do that, and you should do it. Though there's a longish line, but it moves fast. It's not. Don't be alarmed by like how long it is because it goes quick.
It did seem like first thing in the morning. I want to say it opened around 10, and I felt like right before 10, the line was really long.
People line up and no one's going in yet. The second that it opens up, I think it's fine.
We went there around like 11 or 12, and the line moved very quickly.
You should go in there because there are very significant frescoes on the inside of the dome. Really famous and important art. It was less ornate than I expected, given the outside. The outside of this whole complex has this like green marble. It's really cool looking. You go inside, it's very nice inside, obviously. It probably goes without saying, but it's definitely not like when we went to the cathedral in Toledo or when we went into one of those churches in Naples, the Renaissance era church, like when there's just like stuff everywhere. It was more like, I don't know if that's a Gothic church, but it was more of that kind of aesthetic where it was like kind of laid back in terms of the amount of art that was in there.
Yeah, I still feel like my epitome of crazy over-decorated churches is at the Tile Museum in Lisbon.
Oh yeah, that one.
Is it an old...
Yeah, it's a monastery.
Old convent monastery or something like that. Yeah. And not that we're talking about Lisbon right now, but give me a little digression. You walk into the Tile Museum. I didn't realize that there was this chapel there. And then finally we're almost to the end of the Tile Museum. We go around a corner and the chapel is almost entirely gold.
It's like gold and portraits.
Yeah.
It was just like
floor to ceiling.
Floor to ceiling portraits like framed by gold.
It was unlike anything I've ever seen, and I have yet to see another church that lives up to that amount of gold, that's for sure.
Yeah. But anyway, we sort of walked into the crypt and then kind of turned around because we just didn't need to go in there. But there's a crypt you can visit too, and I think there are, I'm sure, some significant relics there. I don't know who, but you can look it up. We didn't go there.
So as I kind of mentioned, if you want to visit the Duomo complex, with the exception of the church, the cathedral, you need to book tickets in advance. If you want to avoid a line, If you're not wanting to do it online, it seems like the museum is the place to buy the tickets. There was nobody there. In line to buy tickets.
Right, because you could buy
in the museum.
You could buy them in the museum.
One thing to note about Florence is that it's expensive. We went to 3 different places with an admission. We went to the Uffizi, we went to the Accademia, we did the Duomo complex. In an effort to kind of save money, we didn't get to see everything in Florence. I feel like the one big thing for me that was left to see is the Church of Santa Croce, which is where Michelangelo is buried.
And there are some other significant churches too, like Santa Maria Novella, and then there's the other one by where we had steak. I don't remember the name of it, where they had the music. But they're all kind of in a line, and you can visit them.
Mm-hmm. But I want to say Santa Croce was like an additional €5 per person or something like that, which isn't hugely expensive. But on top of all of that we'd already spent, we decided to kind of be a little frugal.
Yeah. The food.
Save that for our next visit. One thing we didn't talk about, on our last night in Florence, we did take a walk up to the Piazzale Michelangelo, which is where the bronze David statue lives. Mm-hmm. And it was a really nice place to kind of watch the sunset and get a good view out over the city.
I'm happy to hear you say that.
It was a lot of uphill, and I was a little grouchy.
Yeah.
Just a hair grouchy.
Yeah. I think you said this can't be worth it many times.
If you want to visit earlier in the day, I do believe there's a bus that goes there, so you don't necessarily have to walk 2 miles uphill both ways like they did in the old days to go to school. But yeah, it's a cool place to visit. If you have a car, drive it. I think it's time for a wine break.
We're here for the wine break, and once again, we're staying in Italy with our wines. Actually staying in Sicily from last week. I have here a Nero d'Avola. It's from the Sicilia DOC, and they typically grow this. Nero d'Avola is a grape. It's a red grape, and they typically grow it, I think, in the southeast corner of Sicily. Not near to Etna, but not that far from Etna. This is a 2021. This is not one that we purchased in Italy. It was actually one that I already had at home. But it was a good time to open it. This is one of my favorite Italian grapes, so we'll give it a try. It's a good one. It's fruity, but it's, I'd say, kind of medium-bodied. This wine always reminds me a little bit of Malbec. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that.
It's maybe a little lighter than Malbec, but it's got a lot of the same sort of flavor. I had a red wine like this at the restaurant that we went to way too early that we talked about last time when everyone else was only drinking and we were ordering entrees.
Not only were they only drinking, they were not drinking heavy wine. They were having their Aperol spritzes.
Right. Yeah. But no, this is one of my favorite Italian wines. I had it, I think, once or twice before we went to Sicily, but it has been confirmed as one of my favorites. What do you think?
Is it correct to say that it's a light-bodied wine?
I'd say it's medium. It's fairly light.
It's not super tannic.
No. There's a little bit.
It's kind of
medium. Like it's medium tannin, medium alcohol, medium. Yeah.
Yeah, would be good with some food, I think.
Yeah, good medium wine.
Very medium, this wine.
Oh, it's really good. Nero d'Avola from Sicily.
Let's talk about the food in Florence. The food in Florence was expensive.
I want to make the recommendation that just down the street from the Duomo, there's a lunch counter called Leonardo's, I think it was.
I don't know. The sign just said like self-serve food or some self-serve restaurant.
It was right by the Sophia Loren restaurant.
Oh. I don't know that I even noticed that.
Yeah. Just go upstairs and it's real cheap and really good.
Yeah, it was like €17 for the two of us for lunch.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in a previous episode too, but yes. And so if you're in the Duomo area and you're looking for some cheap food, there you go. Yeah. It's really good. I would go there a bunch. One
thing to know about food in Florence is that their bread is unsalted.
Yeah. There's a whole history of conflict with pizza. And so pizza controlled the salt. And so Florence, if they were having conflict with pizza, they wouldn't have salt. And so they started to use salt sparingly and not put it in their bread. And then they started to do this thing where like, actually, our bread is better without salt, which like it's not. Sorry, Florence. We got used to it, I think. I mean, it's definitely a certain style, but then when we went to Emilia-Romagna and the bread had salt again, I was like, this is better. Yeah.
Something else that Florence is known for is the Florentine steak.
Yes.
And pretty much everybody is quick to remind you that this is not something locals eat all the time.
Because it's huge.
It was invented for the British people that were doing their tour of Italy, their grand tour.
It's a Chianina T-bone. Chianina is a variety of cattle that are in Tuscany. Very flavorful and humongous. I mean, it's a big, thick cut, couple inches thick. And the traditional way to cook it is to sear it on both sides so it has a nice crust, and then stand it upright on the bone. And so that allows the heat to kind of hit the bone that's on top, and the bone carries heat into the center of the steak. It's traditionally served fairly rare, but it's not like rare all the way through. It's a gradient, because you imagine the way they cook it, it's a big piece of meat. So like it's more cooked towards the edge and it's more raw in the middle. We had it the traditional way, and I don't usually get like rare steak, and I didn't find it to be like undercooked to my taste. I thought maybe more of a medium rare even. Could have even just been where we had it too, but it was really good though.
Yeah, it was really good. Definitely not something you would have more than one night unless you are very well.
Yeah, and they usually season it just with salt.
Another specialty of Florence is the wild boar ragu, which is frequently served with pappardelle.
Yeah, this did not disappoint.
Let me tell you, we had that multiple nights.
We had it twice.
It was so good. And we found a place to buy wild boar, and we're going to make it at home.
Yes. Yeah, that was great.
Highly recommend if you are in Florence.
What else did we eat in Florence?
Those are the big things.
Mm-hmm. We had this is kind of a Florentine dessert. We had the Vinsanto, which means holy wine. It's like a fortified wine. And you dip these little almond cookies into it. It's kind of like biscotti. It's not biscotti, it's a different thing, but it's kind of like that. And you dip it in. I liked it. I don't think Ashley liked it that much.
No, I'm not.
It kind of burned.
Yeah, it burned. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, good pasta, good everything else too, but yeah.
Lots of gelato.
Yeah. I mean, being lots of tourists around, lots of gelato.
Yeah, I found an article that was like the best places to get gelato in Florence, and I made a map, and we had lots of gelato.
We also went to a wine window. These are like all the rage on Instagram now, apparently. They're just these little windows that the Medici put in years and years ago.
I guess it was a way for people to avoid paying taxes. Like, if you don't come into the store, you don't have to pay taxes.
Something like that. But they fell into disuse, and then they just recently started getting used again from the pandemic. It was like a way that these places could serve wine without having like face-to-face contact. And then they became popular on social media, and so now everyone's doing it.
Oh, yeah, and you have to take your picture when you pull your glass, the little window. We found one in the Ultra Arno neighborhood that was not far from where we were staying that did not have a line. A lot of the other ones on the other side of the river are notoriously like overcrowded where you'll wait a really long time.
Yeah.
And so
because you have to get the photo with your hand.
Yes, can't be somebody else's hand, or they will know. So that was Florence. Let's move on to our time in Bologna. So once again, we took the train from Florence to Bologna, and once we came up the 8 levels of the train station.
I think it's 3 levels, but it feels like a lot of levels.
Yeah, it really surprised me because Bologna is not the biggest city that we visited, but it definitely felt like one of the biggest train stations. I don't know if it's just a very connected city.
Yeah. I think the population is slightly larger than Florence, which was surprising to me. There are a lot of mountains between Bologna and Florence. They're close together, relatively close together, but there are a lot of mountains in between. And so because of that, when they built these high-speed rail, which I think was only like 15 years ago, maybe it wasn't that long ago, a lot of it is underground.
It was almost entirely underground. I think it was like a 45-minute train.
Probably half of it.
And yeah, at least.
Yeah. So when you get to Bologna on a high-speed train, you're underground. And so you have to come up. Yeah.
I expected the train station to be much smaller than that. especially because of all the places that we went, Bologna is definitely the least known for tourists, I would say.
Everyone knows Bologna.
Right. So Bologna was kind of our last addition to this trip as it was kind of being formed. Fred Plotkin, he's the co-author of the Rick Steves Italy for Food Lovers book. And we heard a podcast and he was just going on and on about how if you love Italian food, you need to go to Emilia-Romagna, or, you know, the big city in Emilia-Romagna is Bologna.
Yeah, and I had heard of Emilia-Romagna, but I hadn't paid that much attention to it. And as we did a little bit of research after hearing that podcast, it was like, oh yeah, we need to go there. Especially because, I mean, not only do we love food destinations and wine destinations, of course, but also we like to go places that are not as known as a part of a trip. Like when we went to Toledo in Spain, which is a place a lot of people have heard of, but a lot of non-Spanish tourists don't go there. And that was maybe one of our favorite stops on that trip. And so we made sure that Bologna was in our itinerary.
Bologna is also a college town, which kind of gave it a different vibe than the other places that we've been.
Yeah, I think it's the oldest university in Europe.
Yeah, the University of Bologna.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not Bologna University.
No. When we got there, I was like, I think I'm going to buy like a t-shirt that says Bologna University. And then I realized that if I wore that at home, people would think I had a sweatshirt that said Bologna University. I'm like, I don't think I could do that. People might think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
I'm just really passionate about Bologna. So one of the things that Fred Plotkin talked about in this interview that we heard was how your favorite Italian foods are from Emilia-Romagna. So Parmigiano-Reggiano is from Parma? Is that
or Reggio. It's actually between the two, Parma and Reggio. Yeah.
Parma ham is from Parma, obviously. And then the fanciest would be balsamic vinegar of Modena. Modena is also in Emilia-Romagna. So it's kind of like this trifecta of the best things.
Don't forget the mortadella.
Oh, and of course, yes.
The mortadella, which is from Bologna. Our food guide, which we'll talk about our food tour in a minute, she said even when you go to like Milan, that sometimes there will be meat that's referred to as Bologna.
Oh, interesting.
That is mortadella. It's like the meat from Bologna is so named, or Bologna rather, is so named because it is kind of a child of mortadella. They are very similar. People who are passionate about mortadella would scream in your face if you say they're similar. But like, come on. Mortadella obviously tastes better and is higher quality, but they are a similar concept for sure.
Yes, and mortadella in Bologna will not have pistachios in it.
This was really interesting because a lot of times, I mean, in the U.S., certainly you find pistachios in mortadella very commonly. But the story is that after World War II, the U.S. Army was present and they were looking for a way to enrich foods to help solve malnourishment. And so one of the things they did is they were in the south of Italy where pistachios are abundant. They started putting pistachios into things like mortadella just to help people have better nutrition. Even in Italy, a lot of places in Italy, mortadella has pistachios. It's very normal. But in Bologna, no.
And our guide was very clear to tell us that there is no such thing as spaghetti bolognese.
Yeah, she was very particular. It's not that it's not from Bologna. No, it doesn't exist. No such thing. Doesn't exist.
Such thing. There will be pasta in Bologna called ragu that seemed very similar to bolognese to me. But don't you dare say that to a bolognese person.
I know. This is like, it's so Italy. Like this. Here's this other thing that to our perceptions was sort of slightly different, but it's like, no, it's completely different.
Do not compare them.
Yeah.
So the big thing we wanted to do in Bologna, now that we've talked about all the famous foods from Bologna, was a food tour. Mm-hmm. Our food tour began at 10 in the morning.
It started with coffee, which was good. Espresso, of course.
Mm-hmm. And like a cone-shaped pastry.
Yeah, it was good.
Our guide took us into one of the markets in Bologna. It was pretty cool. There was lots of good-looking produce in there. Our first stop in the market was at the cheese shop where we tried some of the Parmesan from Emilia-Romagna.
Yeah, or Parmigiano.
We had one that was aged like 24 months, another one aged like 48 months, and then the older one had some of the balsamic vinegar on it.
Yeah, the traditional stuff.
Yes, the really good stuff that if you try to find it in Bologna, it's like $80.
Yeah, even there it's expensive because it's aged typically around 20 years and it's made in a very traditional way. You can also get really good balsamic vinegar that is not made in the traditional way that is pretty inexpensive and really good, but it's not the traditional, which is expensive there too.
I was surprised because I'm not a huge Parmesan fan. Like if you go somewhere that has charcuterie and they put a big chunk of Parmesan on it, I'm going to give it to Chris. Like it's too pungent. That's what I would say. Yeah. This Parmesan did not have that.
It's more delicate than what we have here. We had a sandwich of mortadella. It was really good. It kind of needed some mayonnaise. Hate to say it, Bologna. You need condiments. They don't really use condiments there. I'm just saying.
So after the mortadella sandwich, which we ate in the entranceway to this restaurant where they were blasting music as like a please get out of our restaurant. Next in the market, we stopped and she picked up some ham and salami, I think.
Oh, right.
And then she picked up some bread. One thing, and maybe I should talk more about this at the end, but there was someone on our tour that was a vegetarian. And I kind of feel like she overpaid for the tour.
This is not the place for it.
It was a lot of meat, a lot of, ham and salami and mortadella. And then at the end, the ragu had meat in it. And so I feel like her tour should have cost like at least $20 less than the rest of ours. Yeah. We went to a pasta maker who was making tortellini by hand.
Yeah.
In Bologna, tortelloni is filled with ricotta and tortellini is filled with meat.
And tortellini is smaller.
It's smaller.
Like a lot smaller.
Well, yeah, because it's eeny.
Oh, yeah.
And the traditional preparation of tortellini is either in broth or in like a cheese, creamy cheese sauce.
It's like a bechamel. I know there's another thing. It's like there's no Alfredo in Italy, and then they give you a bechamel with cheese in it. That's like, this is kind of like Alfredo.
This is Alfredo. No, it's not fettuccine Alfredo. So this was before we did the food tour. It was the night before, and I had ordered the tortellini because it's a specialty of Bologna, and I'm eating it. And I said to Chris, I'm like, this tastes a lot like Alfredo sauce. Probably not allowed to say this here.
Don't tell them.
But so we had tortelloni. We were standing there, and she's telling us about the history of food in Bologna. And then the guy from a fruit stand's like, here, apricots.
Was it apricots?
Have some apricots.
After that.
Oh, after that, we had our meat and bread at the little...
It was like an old school osteria.
Yeah.
So they only had wine. Now, today, osterias serve food. But in the old days, osteria meant wine only. And you could bring your own food. And so this was like an old school osteria that was that situation.
Do you remember what the wine was that they served us there? Because I know we ended up buying. Did we talk about?
Was it Pignoletto?
Oh yeah,
or was that?
No, that was the Pignoletto.
Okay, it was Pignoletto, which we talked about a couple. We actually recorded that when we were. That was our wine break in Bologna.
Yes, that was. You can go back and hear about it. I believe the episode was traveling on a budget or something like that.
Yes, money saving tips.
Yeah, like 3 episodes ago. So that was really cool. And somebody on our tour said, speaking of like old school, they said they went to use the bathroom there and it was just like a hole in the ground, which is also a old school Italian toilet. After that, we walked around the street, which was where our hotel was located, which we didn't talk about earlier actually, but it was the old fishmonger street.
Yes, the Pescheria Vecchia. It was fishy.
It was fishy there.
But there's all kinds of like pasta and fruit. And like it's the kind of place where if we were staying for longer, I absolutely would have bought a ton of food there that we could have cooked. Italy. Italy was there. That's
a chain that you'll find in the U.S. It'll teach you to cook Italian food and they'll have an Italian market and things like that. I know Chicago has one.
Yeah, Italy was there and so was the wine shop that we ended up buying a bunch of wine at.
Mm-hmm. And wasn't the cheese shop there
too?
The
cheese shop, yeah. It was honestly a great place to stay. It's right in the center of everything. It was perfect.
And then we ended at a little pasta maker. I think it was called like the Pasta Factory or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's where we had the ragu, and I don't remember what kind of pasta it was on.
Probably, I don't remember. It was like a flat, broad pasta, like a tagliatelle. Tagliatelle's baked in Bologna. It was probably that.
What it was. And we had a red wine there.
It's a Sangiovese from Emilia-Romagna, which is something to note. So Sangiovese is a big grape in Tuscany, and it's usually very bold and very full-flavored and tannic when it comes from Tuscany. In Emilia-Romagna, I assume because it's a little bit cooler, it is lighter. And I had heard about this. When you're in Emilia-Romagna, try the Sangiovese because it's different than Tuscany. And boy, were we not disappointed by that. I ended up loving it so much more than the Tuscan one. Much more subtle. Yeah.
So if you are thinking about visiting Bologna, I highly recommend a food tour. Our tour was through Devour Tours. It was great. Our tour guide was great. She was actually really interesting because she is from Bologna, but she had, like, her mom's family was from Bologna and her dad's family was from Florence. Like we mentioned, it was like by high-speed train, it was like 45 minutes apart. But the culinary traditions of these two places are pretty different. I mean, by American standards, I would say they're the same, but by Italian standards, very different. And she told us all kinds of stories about her one grandmother teaching her to cook something, and then she'd go visit the other grandma, and she'd be like, "Why did she tell you to do that? That's wrong."
Yeah,
it was just a like great little addition to a food tour.
Yeah, think about like the city where you live and the city next to the city where you live, and it's like that's the distance probably between these two places.
But I guess there are mountains, so back in the day,
yeah.
It was probably not super easy to get between the two places, so they developed things a little differently, and Italian grandmothers are very particular.
A couple other non-food things to mention about Bologna. We didn't do a lot of the sightseeing because we just didn't have the time on this trip.
And we were also kind of burnt out a little bit from Florence, kind of taking a break from museums and things like that.
But there are things to see. There are all these towers for some reason. There are like over 100 towers in Bologna. Some of them you can go up. Some of them are maybe about to fall.
Yeah,
sure.
That was interesting. One of the main towers is at this time closed to tours because they just recently discovered that it's like about to fall down. So it's like wrapped with fences and things like that. And they just all of a sudden were like, something shifted, and they came in one morning. They're like, yeah, that's not safe anymore.
There are a couple of churches that I think are famous. There's one in particular, the cathedral. It's kind of ugly on the outside, and the history there was that they were going to make a really big cathedral, and basically Rome stopped them. And they're like, you can't make it this big because that's going to be bigger than St. Peter's, and they can't be bigger than St. Peter's. There's a whole history of like rivalry and domination of Rome in Bologna, which is kind of interesting too, and there are definitely historical artifacts of that historic rivalry. The other thing that's really cool just architecturally is the city has all these porticos, which like on a lot of the main streets in Bologna, it's just very normal that the second floor of buildings overhangs the sidewalk. And second and above, obviously. But so the sidewalks are covered like for miles and miles and miles. It's really interesting. All these sidewalks are covered, and that's kind of a cool, interesting, and unique architectural attribute of the city. It was just really fun. Lots of outside dining, just like in other cities. They have Lambrusco, which is good, which we'll talk about in another episode, I'm sure.
Another big site in Bologna is the Teatro Anatomico, which is the anatomical theater.
It's like where they would do dissections of humans and stuff, right? Like at this university, this like old school university. Yeah, like med students of the Renaissance and stuff.
So it's a big destination, big thing to see in Bologna.
I think the next thing I want to do there is I want to just do like a tour of Emilia-Romagna. I go to Modena and Parma, Reggio, like just go around to all those places. It's going to be fun.
Emilia-Romagna is also known for the fast Italian cars.
Right. Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Maserati. I think they're all there.
Factories you can tour. There's like experiences where you can drive them. If you like fast cars, you will also like Emilia-Romagna.
Yes.
And I feel like I want to talk about my favorite drink, the Emiliano Spritz, which I talked about my love of the limoncello spritz in the last episode. But this one was only in Bologna. And so Chris mentioned Lambrusco, and in Emilia-Romagna, they take Lambrusco, and I believe it was apricot juice, and they make that as a spritz.
At least at this place, it was apricot juice. We've seen a lot of different recipes online.
But yeah, it was good and different and not something you can find everywhere.
Yeah.
I think that's Florence and Bologna.
I'm going to go eat some mortadella right now.
Next episode, we're going to talk about Venice and something else. I'm thinking maybe like Italian restaurants and what you need to know. Until next time.
Sounds good. That's all for today's episode of Go, See, Do, Explore. Thank you for joining us and sharing in the wonder of travel.
Keep the spirit of today's adventure alive by checking out our blog at goseedoexplore.com for even more travel inspiration.
Don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really helps fellow travelers find us and join our community.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and keep traveling by any means necessary.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashleigh, bidding you farewell and happy exploring.